Hello there, tired traveler. Welcome to this quiet corner of history. Before we go back in time to explore the freezing winters of the Middle Ages, I just want to say how happy I am that you're here. A time when snow and ice didn't just make life difficult. Back then, winter could mean life or death. Maybe you're lying in bed, getting ready to fall asleep. The sun is low in the sky and gives off very little warmth. Frost covers the ground, and a light snow is starting to fall. The reason for this change is still not fully clear. In London, the River Thames turned into a frozen street. One of them was Isaac Newton. He was a student at Cambridge University when the frost came. He had to leave school and return home to his family's farm. The wealthy had warm clothes, large piles of firewood, and full pantries. But poor peasants and farmers, who made up most of the population, had a much harder life. While sitting by the fire with nothing else to do, he started thinking deeply. That's when he began to work on some of his most famous ideas, like calculus and optics. Every hour of every day was spent trying to stay alive. Still, even in this hard life, people found little moments of happiness and hope. People walked on the ice, built little shops, and even lit fires right there on the frozen river. But also traditions, even family and friends, meant everything. Families gather around their fires, telling stories and sharing whatever little food they have. There's a feeling of togetherness, of helping each other through the cold. Held on December 26th. On that day, the strict rules of society were turned upside down. Poor worker, maybe a servant, or a farmer would be chosen to be the lord of misrule. That person got to lead a wild celebration full of music. It was one day of joy in a season of hardship. Festivals and joy. Even in deep winter, there were small lights to look forward to. But they're also strong. They've survived many winters. And they believe they'll survive this one too. It looked amazing, but it was deadly. Many people died in their homes that year from the bitter cold, but its effects were felt everywhere. Crops died, animals froze, and the wind blew colder than ever before. Smoke from the fire fills the air. You can see your breath in front of you. Your bed is just a bundle of straw. Your whole family is curled up around you, trying to stay warm. Cold air sneaks in through every hole in the wall. Your fingers and toes are numb and painful. Winter is coming. And for people in those days, winter meant one thing. Or maybe you're just looking to relax and listen to a peaceful story from the past. Either way, thank you for joining me tonight. It's heavy work, and your hands are quickly dry and cracked from the cold. But you have to keep going. Without firewood, your family won't make it through the night. You think of your children, cold, hungry, and small, and you carry on. If you'd like, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're re-listening from and what time it is for you. It's always lovely to hear from people all over the world who enjoy history. The food from last autumn's harvest is running low. You know the coming weeks will only get harder. Out in the barn, your animals shiver. Frost clings to their fur. They huddle together to stay warm, their breath steaming in the cold air. And if you like calm, quiet stories like this, you can subscribe so you don't miss the next one. But for now, let us forget about the busy modern world and go back to a time when winter was not just cold, it was dangerous. Snow would soon cover the land, and ponds and rivers would freeze solid. But it wasn't always this way. Long ago, winter was more gentle. People expected it and accepted it. Then something changed. The weather began to shift. This period lasted from the 1300s all the way to the 1800s. Winters became longer and harsher. One of the coldest winters in history happened in 1709. That year, the temperature dropped so low. Still, even in times like that, some people used the cold in surprising ways. It makes you wonder how many great ideas were born because of a long, quiet winter. But for most people, winter wasn't a time for thinking. It was a time to survive. Imagine waking up in a small, cold cottage. If you're lucky, breakfast might be a bowl of porridge or a bit of old bread. Later in the day, you go out into the snow to gather firewood. This was everyday life for many people in medieval times. You see, people back then lived closely with nature. They noticed the changes in seasons, and each season brought not just problems. One of those lights was the Feast of St. But perhaps the strongest symbol of hope in the medieval winter was the act of simply being together. When life was this difficult, picture a small village covered in snow. Smoke rises from chimneys. It's a sign that people are alive inside. In the houses, neighbors visit each other through the snow. One brings firewood. Another brings a pot of soup. Everyone looks tired. The long medieval winter was not just a passing season. It was a way of life. Cold, slow, and difficult. Every day brought new problems, and every problem took time and energy to solve. The days were short. The nights were long. People lived with little, but they carried on, quietly and carefully. Let's look at what daily life in winter really meant for ordinary people during these times. In small villages, life moved slowly. Most people lived in tiny wooden or mud houses. The walls were thin. The wind would blow through gaps in the wood or stone. There were no glass windows, just wooden shutters. The floors were made of dirt, and straw was often laid down to keep out the chill. Chickens, goats, or even a cow might stay in the corner of the room, helping to share body heat. It was rough and filled with bits of chaff or grit. Sometimes it was so hard that it had to be soaked in soup or ale before eating. If the harvest had been poor the year before, then meals got smaller each week. If there were holes, straw was packed inside to keep feet warm. Mittens, if they existed, were made of rough wool. Cold fingers and toes were common. So were chilblains, painful red bumps caused by freezing temperatures. People had to stretch their food and make it last. There were stories of whole villages where people survived on nothing but broth and bread crusts. The rivers were cold and sometimes completely frozen. If water was needed, someone had to break the ice. A roasted animal or a pot of soup might be shared among villagers. Bread would be handed out. Knowing that your neighbor might share firewood or bring food if you fell ill made the cold more bearable. Churches were often one of the warmest buildings, thanks to thick stone walls and big fires. Villagers gathered there not just for worship, but also for warmth, news, and support. They shared what little they had. And through these quiet, careful acts of kindness, they found a way to make it through. It taught patience, endurance, and the deep value of community. Religious festivals during winter, like Christmas or Candlemas, were chances to forget hunger and celebrate for a day or two. The snow would melt, the rivers would flow again, and the cycle of the seasons would continue. These acts of charity helped people survive, and also built trust in the community. Carrying buckets of water became part of the daily routine. Many went weeks or even months without washing. They believed that cold water might cause illness, so people stayed wrapped up and avoided getting wet. In London, during the coldest years of the Little Ice Age, the River Thames became a place for fun. People set up stalls on the ice, selling food or warm drinks. Jugglers and musicians came to perform. There were even games and small rides. It was dangerous. The ice could crack, but it gave people joy in the darkest part of the year. There were no doctors in most villages. Instead, people relied on herbal remedies or simple treatments passed down from older generations. Some believed in charms or prayers to ward off sickness. Old legends, folk tales, or simple bedtime stories helped pass the time. Some families sang songs or said prayers together. Others carved small tools or fixed clothing. Winter was hard, but it gave people time to be close, to talk, to remember. It sounds strange now, but it made perfect sense in a world without heating. Inside, the house was dark and smoky. Most homes had only one small fireplace. That fire wasn't tea, just for warmth. It was also where food was cooked, and sometimes even where people dried clothes or warmed stones for their beds. The chimney, if there was one, didn't work very well. Smoke would fill the room, making people cough, but they still sat close to the fire. It was the only place that gave any comfort. Everyone stayed close together. Families shared beds or sleeping mats. Sometimes they even brought animals inside to sleep. Outside, the land was frozen. Snow covered the ground. Food was always a concern. The harvest was done in the autumn, and whatever was stored had to last through the winter. There were no fridges, no supermarkets, just cellars, clay pots, and cold barns to keep things fresh. Root vegetables, like turnips, onions, and carrots. They were buried in the ground or kept in storage holes. Dried beans, salted meat, and pickled vegetables also helped people survive. Bread was a big part of the diet. Heavy, dark, and often made from rye. For many, hunger was normal in the winter. Children grew up learning that winter meant sacrifice. They wore clothes made from old wool or patched fabric. Boots were handed down from older siblings. Bathing was rare. Water had to be carried from a stream or well and then heated over the fire. In winter, this task became harder. Illness was a serious threat in winter. Colds, fevers, and infections spread easily in cramped, and yet life went on. People found ways to cope. They told stories by the fire. In some places, winter fairs were held. When the rivers froze solid. Meanwhile, in the countryside, some landowners and local leaders organized small gatherings for the poor. Despite the hardship, winter brought moments of connection. People needed one another, not just for help, but for comfort. Even the church played a part in holding communities together. In the face of so much cold, people created their own kind of warmth, not just with fire. They looked out for each other. The medieval winter may have been brutal, but it was also a season that brought people closer. And as the days slowly began to grow longer, and the first signs of spring appeared, people looked ahead with hope. The rooster crows. You wake on a lumpy straw mattress in a dim, smoky one-room hut. The fire has burned low. The air smells of damp wool, wood smoke, and something slightly unpleasant. And to get grain, you need land, good harvests, and the Lord's permission. You might rent a strip of land in a long field, growing barley or rye. Your diet revolves around simple, repetitive foods: bread, porridge, and cabbage. In the morning, you might heat up yesterday's pottage, a thick, dull stew of barley, lentils, and any greens you found growing wild. Onions, if you have them, are chopped and boiled. Everything is boiled. Seasonings are rare. Salt is precious. Pepper is a luxury. If you're lucky, you might grow garlic or herbs. But mostly, you eat to not be hungry, not for pleasure. Wheat is for the rich, or for holy days. If last year's harvest was poor, you're probably already eating your seed stock. In the Middle Ages, hunger is your familiar morning companion. Surviving means starting the day by thinking, what do I have? What did I gather? What can I trade? What can I scavenge, forage, or hope for? If you do have meat, it might be salted pork. So salty, it has to be soaked in water to even chew it. Fish is more common. Herring, when available, is dried. Fridays are fish only by church decree. Today, like every day, you must figure out how to feed yourself and your family. In a small village, you don't have many options. Bread is life, if you can bake it. But first, you must have flour. There is no fridge, no cupboard, no store down the road. Let's say you're an average peasant, not starving, not wealthy. You don't eat much meat. Meat is for feast days, or for those who poach rabbits and risk the stocks. Cabbage is boiled. Turnips are boiled.